Hey friends, Catherine here from Research Rockstar. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'd like to talk about data privacy. I know there's a lot of questions about data privacy out there, and for many of us in market research, it can be a bit of a daunting topic. Part of the challenge with data privacy is that there are legal issues and there's also IT issues. And hey, I'm a market researcher. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an IT expert, but it's starting to feel like I need to have some expertise in those realms in order to make sure that I'm in compliance. So I know it can feel a little bit intimidating. So I've put together some information that will hopefully make you feel comfortable in terms of getting a foundation in data privacy from which you can build. So first of all, why do we care so much about data privacy? Why is this always in the press? Well, it has gone up. There have been more and more breaches. And if we look at some of the data that talks about the trends here, we really can see that the number of data breaches and the number of people whose information has been exposed has really increased over the years. So in this chart from Statista, what we see is that from 2005 to 2018, that there has been an increase in the number of records exposed. So yes, there's also an increase in the number of breaches, but some of these breaches have been really big. So now, even in the United States alone, millions and millions of records have been exposed. So it's not surprising that the general consumer population is also aware and they have concerns. What does that mean for me as a market researcher? Well, for me as a market researcher, response rates are already bad, right? Getting really wonderful people to participate in research is already hard enough. I need to make sure that concerns about data privacy don't cause the already bad response rates to get even worse. So what do I have to worry about? Well, when I talk to Research Rockstar students who work in various types of organizations and various industries, I tend to hear the same kind of questions come up. I hear folks say that they want to make sure they're not breaking the law. You know, at minimum, I just want to make sure I'm not breaking the law. And sometimes it's hard to know because in market research, whether you're doing quantitative methods or qualitative methods, we are often touching people's data. That sounded a little weird, but we're touching data, right? We're collecting data, we're analyzing data. At various points in time, we're touching people's data. And so we know that that's a concern. How do you know whether or not what you're doing with that data might be inadvertently breaking a privacy regulation? And I also often hear our students talk about how they really do, of course, respect the privacy of the respondents. You know, so I know as researchers, we want to do what's right. It's not just about protecting ourselves legally, but we also want to do the right thing. How do you do both? And frankly, part of it is that some of the lingo around the regulations is a little bit confusing. Even something as simple as what information is considered sensitive, right? So if I'm collecting data, what types of data am I collecting that would actually be relevant to regulatory requirements, and what information is not? And of course, because this is a little complicated and because it does end up touching on both legal issues as well as IT issues related to network security, how you protect unwanted breaches, as well as the IT security issues that you may have if you work for a larger organization and frankly you have a lot of employees. Keeping those employees connected properly is also a concern. So there's legal issues and there's IT issues. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So if you go to like your favorite search engine, whatever that may be, and you were to enter data privacy, I think you'll find when I did it last time, which was pretty recently, I got over 70 million matches, right? So there's just tons of information being written out there and being published and promoted about data privacy. But as you start looking through this information, you know, some of it doesn't really pass the gut test, right? So sometimes I would be looking at information and I'm not sure if this information is really just somebody pontificating or if it's coming from a source that is truly qualified. So there's almost too much information. So how do you get to the quality information? So I worked with some of our instructors here at Research Rockstar to try to create some curated content so we could at least get you started. Hey, I'm not saying that I'm a data security expert. I am not, nor am I saying any of our Research Rockstar instructors are really experts specifically in data privacy, but we've done a lot of research and we've really sought out the best resources for you so that we may not be the experts, but we've done a really good job, I think, of curating that information. So you don't need to be overwhelmed. We're going to make it really easy for you to get started. And one of the things we did was we took some of that curated information and we made just a handy one-page reference sheet. And on the left-hand side, it's got sort of things that all business people need to know these days about data privacy. And on the other side, it's got some specific considerations for market researchers. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to where you can download this. You don't need a credit card. There's no form. It's literally a click to download. So if you'd like this as a handy way to get started, please do check out the show notes and download the document. Also, you will see when you download the PDF, at the very bottom, there's some really tiny print, really tiny. But that print includes links to 4 resources that we primarily use to collect the items that are identified in this PDF. And all 4 resources are really, really great. So check out the PDF, but also click through to those other 4 sources, because I think you'll find them to be really great resources if you feel like you need to get a little bit farther. Now, part of our challenge, of course, is that there are different regulations. It's not like there's one regulation we need to be aware of as professional researchers who are trying to stay, comply with whatever regulations are relevant. I think in the last couple of years, many of us have been hearing about GDPR. GDPR is going to be relevant to those of us who do collect data or store data from research participants that are based in the European Union. And so GDPR has gotten a lot of press because, well, frankly, because they've really built some teeth into that. So with GDPR, if you are found to be not in compliance with the GDPR requirements for managing information, then you are potentially at risk of some very, very significant fines. I'm not talking slap on the wrist. I'm talking fines that could put a business out of business. So it's not a trivial thing. So GDPR is definitely one of the regulations that you need to know about, especially if you're involved in any European data collection. HIPAA, of course, for those of you who do research in healthcare, you've already known about HIPAA. For those of you who may be newer to research or newer to research in healthcare, you might be surprised. There are some really actually pretty significant requirements that do involve collecting information, even for research purposes, about what has to be disclosed, what has to be reported. So really specific things for the healthcare industry. Now, not all regulations are at a federal or national level. Last year, the California Consumer Privacy Act was put in place, CCPA, and other states may be coming out with similar sorts of things in the future. So it's not just the federal regulations you need to be aware of, it can also be state level regulations. And for those of you who are in the finance or insurance industries, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act is another regulation you should be familiar with. This is actually a few years old now. I think that's been around since like 2015. But if you're planning on doing research relevant to financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, that's a regulation that you're going to want to be familiar with. Now, of course, there is just a lot of generic lingo. Outside of the acronyms and all of the regulatory names, there's a lot of lingo. And one of the things that can sound a little confusing is PII. So when you're reading about all this data privacy stuff, you'll often hear people refer to PII, personally identifiable information. And the key word there is identifiable. So what PII is really about is that the information that has been breached would allow somebody to identify you at a very specific level. So they can identify you as a person. They know that this information is about you or representing you at an individual level. And so that could actually include a wide variety of types of data. It could be driver's license numbers, social security numbers, it could be school ID numbers, bank account numbers. There are a lot of different identifiers that are unique to us in this modern world we live in. And that type of information is amongst the types of information that we're most concerned about when we're talking about PII. But there is some variation. So again, You do have to be really careful, especially for those of you who are dealing with Europe and specific vertical industries. So there is this concept of PII, and you'll often hear people talk about sensitive versus non-sensitive information. Now, just as a couple of examples, if we talk about sensitive personal data versus non-sensitive personal data, there are a lot of different examples. A lot of non-sensitive personal data is stuff that might at first glance seem like it would be personal, like your birth date, but actually that kind of information is often public. So if there's data that you're collecting and it's public data anyway, then we don't have to be as concerned about it. It's the sensitive personal information that we care about. We don't want to be able to identify anybody. We don't want to be able to use identification to access their personal information. So again, it can vary a bit in terms of the granularity that is of concern to the different regulations. But basically, anything that is not publicly available, we want to be careful about. Now, in terms of the resources we put together here to try to curate some good data privacy information, again, we do have that one-page PDF that's got the links to 4 additional resources. So again, I'll put that in the show notes, but the URL is just researchrockstar.com/privacy PDF. Also, we did a webinar on this topic with one of our instructors, Greg Timpany, and that webinar has already been held, but the playback is still available. So if you go to researchrockstar.com/privacy, you can still register and watch that webinar in playback. And that's almost a full hour. And so Greg shares a lot of great examples. He gets into some of the specific regulations. Also, as a guest, another one of our instructors, Julie Warwa, also participates in the webinar and shares some of her experiences in having to think about how do I, as a market researcher, make sure that what I'm doing is going to keep my clients and keep the data protected and in compliance with all of these regulations. So do check out that webinar. And if you found this conversation helpful, that is fantastic. Please feel free to add comments or questions. And if you're new to Conversations for Research Rockstars, please do subscribe and review. I believe it. I believe that inside every market researcher is a research rockstar, and I'm hoping that this conversation series will help research rockstars everywhere to further their skills, advance their knowledge, and of course, we always appreciate a like or a subscribe on either YouTube or iTunes. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.